For the latest film interviews, reviews, and everything making news in pop culture, subscribe to Film Companion now.
Hi, Gitanjali. Welcome to Film Companion. And so happy that Bombay Rose is finally being seen by many people on an OTT platform.
Thank you, Baradwaj Rangan. More than it being seen on an OTT platform, I'm waiting for people to see its making of on Film Companion.
Yeah.
That's something I do all the time and I love it. And
yes.
that's really what's, it's one of the most exciting things I'm doing virtually. Trust me.
So, Gitanjali, let's begin by watching your favorite scene from the film.
The bestest smell.
Best
smell.
Oh, my Rose. They stole it again. Watchman! Watchman! देखो फिर कोई चुरा के ले गया मेरा रोज. तुम कैसा वॉचमैन है? हर टाइम सोता रहता है. Useless fellow.
So this scene is, for me, it kind of encompasses what Bombay Rose is all about. In this scene, you see Miss D'Souza, the character from the film, who used to work in 1950s, in the 1950s and 1960s. She used to work in black and white cinema, the cinema, the films that were being made at that time. And she used to work as a junior artist, as a dancer. And through her, as a character, I've done something in the film which I love most, which is recreate a part of Bombay of the 1950s and 60s, which is lost right now, which cannot be captured in live action anymore. And it's my favorite scene also in a way because this is a scene which cannot be done in live action. It can only be imagined in animation. It can only be executed in animation, and animation being my forte, 2D animation painted frame by frame. I felt it's a wonderful way of recreating 1950s and 60s through the character. And I felt if she is somebody who lived her most beautiful part of her life at that time, then what if she keeps recreating it in her life of today? A life of today which is jobless, which is dilapidated, which has no fame, nothing, where her life has ended. Suppose she walks out of her house, she would still, which she does ceremoniously every evening, she would still want to recreate the life as it was in the 1950s and 60s. And the best part about it is in animation, we could do it. So it was a very difficult scene, a very delicate scene. And also my production designers and coloring artists and background artists left it to be done somewhere towards the end of the film because it needed so much expertise to execute. So here we see a woman walking in today's world, but as she walks, the world changes back into 1950s and 60s. And it was not just done like a VFX kind of a thing. We went layer by layer as development happens. So we deconstruct what is today Bandra, what must have been in the 1950s, 60s. So first, the buildings must have architecturally changed because they were dilapidated. Then shops must have come in. Then the road must have been widened. Then the traffic would have crowded there. Then the people would have come in. So what we did was a backward deconstruction of it. So if you look at it carefully, first you see the hoardings going away, then you see the shops going away, then you see the older buildings, then you see the trees that were behind the buildings, and then you see the sky as it must have been in the 1950s and 60s. So what I loved about the scene is that I can take my viewer from today, transport my viewer from today to 1950s in a matter of 30 or 40 seconds.
So explain to me why, I mean, you've taken us through this. Like supposing I'm making a live action film and I do the whole thing with the green screen and I do it with VFX. Can't the same road widening, road shortening, hoarding appearing, hoarding disappearing, can't the same things be done through those visual effects? Why do you say that animation is the only way that this can be done? What is the peculiar texture that animation lends to this that a VFX shot cannot?
VFX is animation.
Right, I know, but you know what I mean. So
yeah. But it always aids live action. So I feel VFX is really an extension of animation, which has come to do something which cannot be done in live action without VFX, let's say. So VFX is a way of doing animation which could be very realistic and three-dimensional, and my way of doing animation is 2D and painted frame by frame. But I would still insist VFX is completely created. It is not a reality. Whereas for me, when I say live action, it means capturing reality as it is, and therefore the impossibility.
Yeah. Now let's talk about the creation of animation itself. Can you take us through a small clip and say how this comes together piece by piece, bit by bit, layer by layer?
Sure. It seems like magic at times when you see it completely, but I can deconstruct it for you to a certain extent. Like here we have a scene where you see Kamala is walking in the rain with an umbrella, and Salim is walking next to her, and she opens an umbrella and he walks under her umbrella, and they walk together. It's quite an emotional scene towards the end of the film. The way Paperboat Animation Studio, the place where I did my animation, deconstructed my style of doing animation into a practical style of doing animation. So what we did, I would not say is the norm. I would say it's an experiment. We searched for a way to do it and we came up with this as a solution. So what I'm showing you and how we did the film might be quite unique to just Bombay Rose or to my style of animation, but this is how it transpired. So let's begin with describing what my style of animation is and how I do my animation films, because I do them alone and single-handedly, and I paint them frame by frame. I very happily paint a frame and then I move it. What I mean by painting a frame is there is a background, there's a foreground, there's a person, there's a character, there's somebody walking in front of the character. All of this are painted on one single frame. And then the next frame, I move that character. And then the next frame, I move that character. And I also move everything else that happens behind it. But that's because it comes from my mind and my vision that I know as I go along painting frame by frame, this is what I want. Now, when this has to be done by a group of people, it cannot be followed because that one single mind is not controlling it. So what was very beautiful in Paperboat Animation Studio was when they said yes to doing my work, they knew the kind of work that I was doing. And they said, we will figure it out for you so that it looks the way that you have done it. So how we figured it out is, let's look at the expertise that we have in animation. There are people who can do wonderful animation, but they can only do it in line drawing. And then there are people who can do wonderful coloring, painting something frame by frame, but they might have no knowledge of animation. Now, these two expertise is what we wanted to bring onto the team and find a connect between the two to do what I do. So we had a bunch of animators, very senior, almost as senior as me, 15, 20, 25 years in animation, a very small bunch, about 8 or 10 of these animators who did the line drawing of the entire animation. They would do it on Flash, they would do it on Photoshop, they would do it on Color Painter, whichever software they preferred. These line drawings, which were done frame by frame, were then given to a bunch of artists who did not really know animation, but they knew coloring. So they were freshly graduated from art schools like Raheja or JJ and wanting to learn animation. So we had a bunch of about 7 or 8 painters, and then it grew to about 80 painters towards the end of the film. the beginning of the film was concentrated on doing the line drawing, getting it correct. And then we realized between this line drawing and the color drawing, there seems to be a gap. And that gap was not being able to understand where is the light and where is the shadow playing on the characters. So we got a bunch of animators who were not as experienced as my senior animators, but knew animation, 2D animation perfectly, who would take all these drawings and simply do the light and shade, like 3 shades of gray were painted on a flash, a vector software. And then it was given to the coloring artists. They would use Adobe Photoshop and paint frame by frame. And at the end of it, the line drawing is completely hidden. That never shows on screen at all. It is just the painted work of the paint artists, which finally shows. So as you see in the clip, you go from line, then you go from a shadow highlight, and then you go into color. Each and every shot of the film was done like this. I would paint a single shot completely with the background and how the light and shade is going to look, how the rain is going to fall, a completely composited image. Once we were done with all this, then we would take the background, then you take your character, then you give the effects of lightning, rain, everything comes in at the compositing stage.
So it's almost like you have a costume designer, a cinematographer, a stage, like a director, like stage managing the whole thing, because each one of these specialists then kind of stitch together the look of the whole thing. So that's amazing. And then thank you for taking us through this process, because I think what people typically think of as animation is, okay, you just draw, and then in the next frame you draw it so that it moves a little, and then the next frame you draw it so that it moves a little more, so that, you know, a hand maybe goes like this, you know. So that, but this is so much more complicated, because you're talking about light and shadow and you know, like texture and you know, like how the like you said, how the light falls on somebody and how rain falls, and it's just this world that you're creating, almost like a 3D world in a 2D approximation. And that's just mind-boggling. How many cells or how many frames does a movie like Bombay Rose have?
Okay, yeah, so but we do have separate departments which actually fulfill the role of departments, as you mentioned, in live action. So you have a pre-production department, which is essentially doing the backgrounds of the film. So you have somebody designing the backgrounds of the film, then you have somebody doing the layouts, which is exactly which camera angle is looking at that background. So because if the camera angles change, the drawings have to change. So you have somebody doing the layouts. Then you have somebody who does the coloring. It's called the color scheming. So if it's morning, it looks like this. If it's evening, it looks like that. That same space, how it changes. And I had just 3 people managing this entire team. Like in Disney or Pixar, you would have like at least 30 or 40 people working in the pre-production. I had 3 people, and bringing down my vision through creating a background, to creating the layout, coloring it the way you want. And over and above that, the character comes in.
Right.
And that is the animation department. So you have the pre-production department, which is doing the entire background. Then you have the animation department, which is doing the character and coloring it. And then you have the compositing department, which brings it all then together. So at the beginning of it, I have to have my vision very, very clearly imparted to all these essentially three teams. And it's not like live action, the pre-production finishes, the production starts, production finishes, and then the post-production starts. In animation, it can't be like this. It's a very continuous process. You finish some scenes ka pre-production, you start the animation. And when you finish the animation, you start the compositing. But at that time, the pre-production is happening for the rest of the film. So when you do 18 months, you're still doing pre-production for 16 months. And then you're doing animation for the 18 months. And then you're doing compositing for the 21st month because you've not finished it on time. So that's how the whole thing kind of comes together. And each and every artist and everybody needs to know what the other person is doing. Again, unlike a live action film. So when you say 18 months, it's something like 8 to 10 to 12 hours, including Saturdays, Sundays, that people put in to then get this one image together and make it look like, yeah, it was just drawn and painted and okay, a little longer than live action. But you start from a absolutely empty paper. And not just that, in sound and all, edit and all, and because it's empty, it's nothing you start from.
Answer what must sound maybe like a philosophical question. Why? why when you have the story of Salim and Kamla, and you can get an actor to play Salim and an actor to play Kamla and finish the whole thing in 3 months. What is this? I mean, I'm sure you. I mean, this is not going to be an easy answer, but of course, it's love of the art and all that. But beyond that, what is it that draws you into this laborious, as you yourself said, this laborious process?
I'll give you a simple answer. And then I'll give you a philosophical, complicated answer. The simple answer is you can't shoot on Juhu Beach.
Okay.
Just about everybody or live action directors have told me, you can't get permission to shoot on Juhu Beach. You can't shoot inside a dance bar. You cannot shoot an accident on the road. You cannot shoot 17th century, which I recreate with the miniature paintings. So the reason I do it is because it cannot be done in live action. That's a simple part. And the other reason why I do it is it can be done in live action, to be very honest. But the way it would look and the way it would feel and the way it would work out would be like a lot of other live action films. Not that I don't value it. I mean, my entire inspiration comes from live action films. But for me, the level of taking it to cinema, the level of taking it to art, the level of taking it to something that means much more than simply watching a scene of two lovers unfolding on Juhu Beach is exactly like when you see a photograph and when you see a painting of the same thing as done as a painting. It evokes a certain emotion, it evokes a certain sensibility in the person who's watching it. And of course, the person who's watching it needs to be voluntarily wanting to watch something artistic rather than watch something easy. So my films are artistic in a sense, knowing that the audience which is going to watch it might be used to live action films, might be watching it, but here I'm trying to say something more through the medium. And something more, of course, in my story, there is a lot more. There is a socio-political existence of these characters which comes in. I could have told it as a documentary film. I could have told it as a live action film. The reason I do animation is I feel there is a lot of aesthetics that comes in, and there are some difficult issues that I would like to deal with that come into my film. I choose to tell those difficult issues through an aesthetic way, through a way which is very visual, which is very sensual. Every director has their own style and their reasons why they're doing it. I feel over a period of time, this is very unique. Not too many people are doing it. What people are doing with animation is still a lot of mainstream children's animation, fantasy and things like that. But when it comes to poetic, lyrical, difficult thoughts, difficult things that you want to speak in a way that becomes beautiful and therefore more palatable. So all the issues that I deal with are difficult in the film, but they become more palatable because somewhere I seduce, I distract my audience through the beauty of moving a painting frame by frame and telling them that story.
Is there also an element of wanting to keep a tradition alive?
Yes, in a way, but 2D animation as a tradition is, of course, it is diminishing, but I think it's regained its merit because suddenly you're seeing everybody finding, and this is something that artists like us predicted. There is an ennui which comes with extreme realism, but there is really no ennui which comes with a painting. So you would like a Picasso, you would like a Van Gogh, and you would like Jackson Pollock, and you could still like the painters of today. And that has never gone away from people's sentiment. But yes, something which is extremely realistic, like 3D animation was, Jaws was, Jurassic Park was, it cannot be seen anymore by the kids at this time. They can see it as nostalgia, but it looks tacky. It looks old time. And this is always going to happen with something which is technologically very advanced. At some point, that advancement is going to seem like something old. Whereas with paintings, with folk art, with hand embroidery, I bring it down to hand embroidery. When your mother embroiders your name on a handkerchief, no matter how young you are, how old you are, which age you live in, it's always going to be very, very special. And yes, so all of us who do 2D animation want to keep it alive, but there is also a feeling that even if we didn't work so hard, it would be kept alive. People want it. It will always find, it's like, new shoots growing in amidst rubble. They'll always find a way to come out and be appreciated and liked.
Right. And I'm glad you speak this way, because now I'm able to I mean, of course we've spoken earlier, but I'm able to imagine how the sensory texture of Bombay Rose comes through, because you really think in a very, very aesthetic way. So that's lovely.
I only feel sad that I can't get smell into my film, because I would love that mullahs, the jasmines, to smell like it smells in Chennai. I mean,
Right.
it so well. That is something that is the only sense that animation and my movie making can't capture. And I wish I could.
One aspect of regular filmmaking, once Tarkovsky said, is sculpting in time. And so most unique part of filmmaking is, or the art that is most specific to filmmaking or cinema, is editing, which is not there in any other. It's not there in drama. It's not there in anything else. Just take us through how an edit happens in an animation, because it's not shot and you're looking at different angles or whatever it is, because you kind of already have pre-planned all the angles, so to speak, when you're going to focus on this phase. There's no, like, if there's an over the shoulder shot, that decision does not have to be made at the editing table, so to speak. You've already planned it. So what is the aspect of editing that makes it to animation, if at all?
Okay, so as you will see in this clip, where I placed the storyboard, or the animatic, as it's called, the animatic, next to the live action shot, as you see in the film. So one essential thing that happens in animation is the process of animation is quite a reverse in terms of the process of, compared to the process of live action. So what we do in animation is, yes, we write a script, but trust me, nobody reads the script. My entire team, I gave the script to anybody, nobody wants to read it. We don't have a patience for reading. The reason I wrote it was to find the funding, nothing else. I went through script labs and all, was to do the funding. What I am good at and what I would love to do is to make a visual storyboard of the entire film. And not just a storyboard, which is a working drawing, but I go to the next extent of doing the animatics. The animatics essentially is every shot of the film put on a timeline with the background, time of day, the mood of the character, the way the character moves. Basically, what this means is that you do your cinematography, you do your acting and your editing in the animatics. And the animatics, once laid out, music helps a lot in the way I form the rhythm of the edit. And as you can see in the clip, it's pretty matched. Now, it's not 100% matched finally in all the scenes. You might have an animation where, you might need to snip off 4 frames or 6 frames. That last trimming, that is the only bit we can do after we have composited the entire film. But we really don't have NGs. We really don't have shots which we can replace with. It is edited before the film begins. And it is not just edited before the film begins. The scratch sound of the film is placed in this edit. So we record the voices of the characters before we do the animation. And after doing the animation, we might go in for a redub. So what we have is an animatic. This is then, once approved, this is then taken to the dubbing studio, and where the characters can see it. These are just still frames in black and white that I do, but all the mood and what they are feeling, what the setup is all very apparent. They dub the voices on this, and based on the length of what they have spoken, we re-edit the animatics. So we put the sound in, the voices in, then we put some of the action in, and at that point I feel, okay, this character has said this, and then turns and walks away sadly. Cut.
तारा तुम्हारे नाक में दम कर देगी।
अरे समीर एक नाक में दम करता है, वो दूसरे नाक में दम करेगी। करने दो, बच्चे तो है।
रेवा नैनों में रहे नदिया नैनों में रहे रंग सुनाए बीती कहानी गंध कभी ना होवे पुरानी उंगली पकड़ कर हम खुशबू के बीते कल में चले रेवा नैनों में रहे
So that's how you have to imagine timing in animation, and especially 2D animation. That is a dying art form, I feel. You know, how we were taught timing, everything. And this happens in theater, this happens in live action, this happens in animation. Each thing that you do, you count in your mind 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. It's a clockwork. So now sometimes, even when I'm feeding my cats, I have this tendency of doing 1001, 1002. It becomes part of your mechanism. Even in theater, it's that, you know, the person says what he or she has to say, and then you say, because it can always change at the moment. So learning how long an action takes. For an old woman, doing this takes this. For a kid, it will be like this. So that is essentially timing. That is essentially editing. That is how the entire film is. I mean, that skill of yours is what needs to go into the entire film.
That's brilliant, because you know, now that you say it, it seems so obvious, but I had never thought of the length of the voice dictating the length of the frame. Because, you know, some people may, you know, adopt a slower way of speaking, some people might speak a little faster, because in live action, that's never a problem, because what they say on the spot is how they speak. So so thank you for you know, for saying that. It just completely reorients, at least for me, it reorients the way I look at how an animated film is edited. Let's talk a bit about the direction. You just spoke about dubbing, voiceovers. How do these aspects play out in an animation film? I mean, is it like you know, when you're doing ADR, when you're doing dubbing in a regular live action, the director sitting there and saying, you know, say this, and they basically have to match the mouth movements that happened earlier. What happens in animation?
Okay, again, it is absolute reverse. When I call in my cast, so to say, the voice cast as it is. Now, I do it very differently from how Disney or Pixar or DreamWorks would do it. In Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks films, especially, the casting is very, very important. So you have, let's say, Shark Tales. You have Robert De Niro playing the shark. So he has a way of saying things. He has a way of acting it out. You shoot it, you capture it, you take that voice, and then you place it into your storyboard. And you make, finally, when you make the animation, you have this as a reference to act. Now, again, I make my life very difficult. And it's the same philosophical answer as the earlier one. Why? But what I choose to do is something, again, very traditional, which is I want all my animators to feel the movement and to feel what the character is going through and put that into the character, rather than take an actor who is a good actor and then your character is going to look like that actor. For me, I feel if that is a scene, let's take Robert De Niro and make the film. Why make him into a shark? If it has, so for me, that doesn't work. For me, it is an animated character, a person who lives on the street. Now, that person is not going to talk like Shah Rukh Khan or Hrithik Roshan or any of these things. A woman who lives on the street is not going to look like or talk like Priyanka Chopra or, so then I would get theater actors, people who can take the role of an actor completely and know that their face is never going to show in the film, in the animated film at all. So I had all my theater friends helping me with the dubbing of the film. So I took characters which might seem similar to the voice of Makarand Deshpande for my villain's character. And he's somebody I know forever. And he just seemed like, this guy is not a villain, you know, he's just somebody, by circumstance, he acts a little evil. And Makarand was perfect for it. So when I drew him, even in the animatics, he was there in my mind. So it looked like him. And then when I was doing the hero, the Bollywood hero, I wanted it to be 2 or 3 heroes put together. And then finally, of course, I chose the voice of Anurag Kashyap because he's such an anti-hero. So again, you're doing a play on these characters and then using these voices. The voice of my main character, Kamla. Now, it was a voice that I decided was quite mature for her age and has a lot of gravitas, Saili Khare's voice. And when my when my animators heard it, they said, "Oh, but Kamla is such a sweet girl. Why is her voice not sweet?" And I said, "Exactly, that's what I want. She looks sweet, but when she talks or when she sings, there is a lot more inside her." Right. So you play with the voices, you play with the characters while you are doing your animatics, while you're writing your script. And then you go on to the stage of dubbing, which is before the filming is done. But I would show my actors this animatics so they could understand what the character is, what the character needs to play. And then I give them a free hand. Like you just, and even the script was very loosely written. The characters had to bring in their own improvisations. A lot of it was just content which was put in and then let them speak. And they spoke and they did a lot of things. I had Gitanjali Kulkarni, a lot of amazing actors from Chaya Kadam, Kalyani Mule doing voices of the women. And I would love to show you this clip where I can take you from how we did the dubbing of a certain scene, which they had no clue how it is going to finally look in the film, except some black and white images. They put in there everything. And then I felt in the black and white animatics that I put in, they brought in something very beautiful while they were dubbing.
ये बोलते हैं अगले महीने डांस बार बंद करने वाले।
अरे कुछ नहीं बंद होगा, सब ऐसे ही बोलते। कोर्ट का ऑर्डर है पट्टी लोगा।
मैं क्या बोलती है, ये जो लोग हैं ना, हाँ, उनको भी इधर बुलाने का और गाने का। ये लैला ने लैला ऐसी में वो सब बुड्ढा अंकल लोग का दिल पे ऐसा मलम लगा दो, सब पिघल जाएगा।
So I decided to change a bit of the animation, and of course at that point we don't call them in. Not in my main characters, like in Salim and Kamla, I don't do this, but where there is a lot of action, there's a lot of women doing things together, the animators need some reference. So it gets very limited, and we decide to act it out ourselves and record it. So for this scene, I acted out all the women by myself.
और अंकल लोग का ना दिल पर ऐसा मसाज करने का, सब पिघल जाएगा।
बात नहीं समझ आती क्या तेरे को? अभी भी यूनियन ज्वाइन कर लो, वो लोग कोर्ट से लड़ सकते तुम लोग के लिए।
And gave it to my animator who delights in doing women, and then she took it onto the level of deriving it and finally making it into a scene.
अभी भी यूनियन ज्वाइन कर लो, वो लोग कोर्ट से लड़ सकते तुम लोग के लिए।
यूनियन, ऑनियन, यूनियन, ऑनियन, यूनियन, छिलके पे छिलका, छिलके पे छिलका, छिलके पे।
So you can see very clearly that it is all very planned. Yet, when an actor gives something extra, then there is room for that extra to come in within the edit, within the cinematography, within everything kept intact. That little bits of sparks which come in from everyone, that has to find a space. Otherwise, it's not very enriching as a process. So all that happens, and then finally you have a scene, and it evolves like this.
Right. It's like, so even animation is not as controlled as one thinks it can be. This, because like from what you say, there's so much of spontaneity that happens when somebody acts, or I don't know, somebody does something, or even sometimes you might discover that a coloring artist has stumbled on a shade that you might not have imagined, and suddenly you're rethinking some maybe the color of a shirt or something like that. It's just there's so much of I mean, because I always envisioned an animation director to be this kind of dictator, because everything seems so controllable, and this is just like how, to the extent possible, it's also a loose process.
See, every creative process needs to be. Some of them have a lot of restrictions, and you cannot. But it's like classical music, okay? Yeah. It has a lot of restrictions, but inside of that, finding one little space where you can improvise becomes very valuable, very beautiful. And as opposed to say jazz where you have to start improvising and you end with the improvisation. But even in that, the happiness is the same because you can do only this much.
Yeah.
And in this, you can do even less, but let's have the pleasure. And I feel in any creative process, which especially goes on something like 18 to 21 months, if you don't have this, nobody's going to last the passion of making it happen. So what I did with my animators was give them the easier scenes in the beginning, let them get used to my style of animation. And towards the end, the last 6 months was when all the important scenes of the film were given to them, if they were good enough and if they went to that level where they could handle it. And believe me, all of them did. Not just handle it, they did it better than I would have been able to do it myself. Towards the end, there was a bunch of coloring artists who I approved a scene and they said, no, this is not done. All these details are still left. And I said, it's not going to show, especially in the miniature. No, ma'am, we have to do it and we know how to do it. Don't worry, Saturday, Sunday, we will sit and do it. So that becomes very beautiful that you give them something with a lot of constraints, but in that they find their own voice, their own special way of putting in what they want to put in. Because I remember when I was their age and I was given something with very strict guidelines, nothing more than this, I would still want to do that little more and make my director happy. So that has to be there, that should be there. It's like, weaving a carpet. It is so streamlined, everything. But in that, you can put a few more triangles geometrically extra and make that your own. And just that much gives you the happiness of having done the improvisation. It doesn't make you feel, I have no creative freedom at all. Within the constraints, one little thing, that for me is understandably creative freedom.
Lovely. How do you put in the music? At what stage does the music come in?
The music also, I hate to admit this, comes at the animatics level. Everything. Actually, once I finish the animatics, I'm like, okay, I'm done. Now somebody just take it and do the manual labor of making it. It's like, you design the Taj Mahal and you're happy. Now somebody just has to build it. But in your mind, the design, how it's going to look and how people are going to walk into it, what they're going to feel and all that, everything finishes off in the blueprint of the design. Yet, how the film looks, how you walk through it, or how Taj Mahal looks and what you walk through it, and 300 years later, what happens, that has its own life. So music also, in the same way, comes at the animatics level. And as I mentioned to you earlier, when I do the edit, I use a lot of music. It helps me build the rhythm to do the edit. And especially in Bombay Rose, when I was doing this 90-minute timeline of putting all the scenes together, I envisioned music in a way which, again, is not very conventional in animation films. Conventional animation films have background music, background score, as it is called, which runs through the beginning of the film to the end and in all its merchandise and everything. And it's quite like Lion King and all. Everybody remembers the music of those films and stuff. Again, for me, that was not the way I wanted to approach Bombay Rose as a film. It could not have that grandeur of a background music, because somewhere I feel when you have that kind of a background music, the audience is pulled away from the reality of the film and is watching it like a movie. Is not feeling like they are inside it. So I wanted to give the impression that they are inside it. And one of the ways to do it was the simplest way, actually, just refer to how things are around you. So in a place like Bombay, I get out of my house, I get into the elevator, there is an elevator music playing. Then I get into a rickshaw, the rickshaw wala is playing his own music. Then I go to Bandra and I change into a cab and that cab is playing his own music. Then I go to another building which has another elevator music. Then I go to this animation studios where all the young people are playing their own music. And then you come to a meeting where somebody's phone rings with that music happening. So we are so noisy and we are so musical as a people. So I said, let me use this in the film, that each time you traverse through the characters, their music plays in the film, the kind of music that they would listen to or incidentally exists over there. So you have Juhu Beach, where you have music being played by the Panwala, you have music being heard on the beach. If she was in a house, she would be always playing music from the 50s, 60s. So you start with that. When she goes out, that music follows her. So it is the music of the people that I wanted in the film. And when I was doing the animatics, the easiest thing for me to do was to get the music that I loved, that I've heard, that suits the mood perfectly, get it online, just get an MP3 and put it onto my animatics. So this was, most of the film was incidental music and like archival music, therefore. Then there was this other part where I wanted original music, and that I decided would be the mindscape of the protagonist, Kamala. Right. She has a voice, but she doesn't talk too much as a character. Yet she has a voice inside her mind, and that I felt could be a song. Coming from where she comes, which is Madhya Pradesh, in that region, Malwa, is a very musical region, and there is folk singing happening, and there is this ballad of Baz Bahadur and Roopmati. She must have heard all that, she must have sung all that. So she has a voice which sings her inner thoughts. So I found a way of getting silence in a film which is essentially shot in Bombay, to get the silence by going into the mindscape of my main characters. So therefore Kamla. So Kamla's voice was something that we created originally for the film. And again, it's not a very typical way of doing it. So I got Saili Khare, the girl whose voice is Kamla's, and she's essentially a singer. And Swanand Kirkire, simply because I love his lyrics. And I said, here is the film. I have no idea what music should come here. And I really have no idea about music. When I use music, which is archival, that's one thing. When it needs to be created, I just got the two wonderful people, got them at home and gave them some food and drinks and all that. I said, like, take off. And they created this over a period of a couple of evenings. They created this beautiful, soulful song, which she sings throughout the film. And after I got that song, I placed it in the right places where it would work. And that was essentially how I did the original music of the film.
तू बहुत दिनों से समंदर नहीं गई?
आप भी तो नहीं गए?
मेरे मोटे शीशे में तो बूंद भी समंदर बन जाती है। लेकिन तू जाना जरूर।
नैनों में रहे नदिया तेरा घर नीला समंदर मुँह क्यों मोड़ रहे रेवा नैनों में रहे.
Surprisingly, just a couple of weeks back, I got a call from A.R. Rahman, who had watched the film because it was in the Oscar contender and he's part of the Oscar jury. Out of the blue, I've never worked with him, never met him, because he liked the film. And one of the things that he told me was that in the most dramatic scenes in the film, one would expect a very dramatic background score to happen, but you have used this single soulful voice, and that works very beautifully. So I said, wow, if a master thinks, because it was a very tough decision. Yeah. My producers were not convinced. My sound designers were also a little skeptical. I said, let's try it. And it just got that soulful silence, which finally everybody thought worked. But while you're doing it, it's like, where does this come from? Where have you heard this before? Has anybody done this before? I said, no. But let's try it. And I think that kind of worked. And of course, my sound designer, PM Satish, he is somebody who works almost equally creatively as I do on my films. I do the entire visual part, but the entire sound part is left to him. Left to him in the sense, like, I don't even bother to go in the initial stages. He just gets it. And we've worked over in the past over a couple of films, and I know him as a friend. And of course, I love his work. And he loves working on animation because it comes to him without any scratch sound. Usually in a live action film, you have a scratch sound, you clean it and you prepare your sound. In animation, it comes from nothing. So Bombay Rose took them a very long time. It was a lot of hard work and very perfectly put together, which is why when you say you saw it in Venice, you also heard it in Venice, which I'm so sad that on Netflix, you're not going to be able to hear it the way it was constructed. It's very, very delicate. It's basically to get the atmosphere through colors, through sound, through space. Smell, sadly missing.
Yeah, and for a film with so many flowers, that's especially something that I'm sure you would have wanted to have. Uh, I- Finally, Gitanjali, I think you may have answered this in the very first question because you chose a tough scene. But what was the toughest scene to execute in the film, and why?
There were many,
Was it
many,
the
many, many tough scenes. Many. But I would say actually tough scene in terms of, let me change the question. I mean, the way you're asking me, not tough in terms of animation, because tough in terms of animation is one thing, but tough in terms of writing,
right?
let's say, was the last scene of the film. Was absolutely, I mean, I think all writers would agree how your story ends.
Okay.
And it went through a lot of evolution, it went through a lot of things, but the way it ends also makes you understand the entire film. So that was something I felt the script labs helped me a lot in being able to contain the end of the film. The end of the film was very long. There was, I think, like 10 minutes more that was happening. And it would have been, it would have killed the film, in that sense. So I feel working out that part of your story in terms of what is the last scene that you leave the audience with is tough. It's tough for, I think, all directors. And that is one place which changed a lot also. It was one ending in the script. It was another in the animatic. It was a third one, finally, when we made the film. So that's, at that time, when I could see the entire film, I could figure out what the last scene should be. And the last scene in terms of animation practically was also a difficult one. It was given to my animator in the end. Prove you can do all this. And they were dying to do it. He was dying to do it. The animators done this last scene of Kamala walking towards the camera. And it, even in terms of animating it, it was that grand scene which everybody waited with bated breath and they didn't understand why. But for me, it was the thing that the audience takes away at the end. It just has to be perfect. And of course, I won't want you to show the last scene of the film.
No, we won't want that. And
Yeah.
but thank you so much for demystifying a process, because one looks at the clinical sheen of the Disney Pixar DreamWorks films and kind of thinks that it's just a bunch of things that you feed into a computer, and of course that has its own set of complexities, because they're trying to animate hair and the skin and trying to do all that kind of stuff. But so one would think that there is an element of extraordinary dictatorial control that goes into this, and to see the looseness within that constraint, of course, to have you explain that with clips, it's been a privilege. Thank you so much for taking us into your world, and of course, thank you for the film.
It's a pleasure, Baradwaj. But another thing I feel is when people see this making of in Disney and this hair and things like that, yes, it is a big deal trying to create something which is realistic. But that's not the end of it. And people feel, oh, if you can create something realistic, then animation is finished. That's just the small part of the entire thing. What they also shy away from showing is the entire difficulty of creating a scene where the head is going to move right at the beginning, and then getting it approved and getting the budget to do it, and then getting the expertise to end up doing it is not in. I mean, people feel that is really not an important part of the filmmaking at all. But I feel for other filmmakers, from there onwards till actually getting that realistic thing done is a process which needs to be demystified. And honestly, I think that it's not so difficult as people make it seem. It's just that you need to learn your craft well to be able to get into something like this. And the beauty of it is, in India, we still have animators who come from the 2D world. So the craft is still very, very, very intact. It's like, people who could shoot with 35 millimeters and now are given a video camera, and they can work wonders with it. But if you learn and start on a video camera, it's a little tougher. So in that sense, it's a dying art, but it needs to be kept alive. The fact that you can visualize something in your mind before you actually do it. And therefore, the demystifying is very, very necessary, where you say, yes, you need to learn it. But once you learn it, it's like you have a kingdom under you. You can control just about everything. But yes, it takes about 4 or 5 or 6 years to learn the craft.
Yeah. So thanks so much for taking us into that craft, Gitanjali.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks.